Hi friends, thank you for taking time out of your day to spend a little with me. I appreciate you. This week I wanted to dive into something I'm interested in, which is the story of Frankenstein. I've always loved the classic monster tales, and when I learned that the Frankenstein story took inspiration from real-life experiments conducted on a murderer, I decided it fit in enough with our channel topic that I wanted to share it with you all. So, I ask you all to join me as we discuss how a death sentence led to the birth, or rebirth in this case, of a fictional monster. On December 6, 1802, John Atkins, a boatman, was employed to work on the Grand Union Canal in London. Shortly after 8 a.m., he made a harrowing discovery. Wedged beneath the bow of his barge was the ice-covered body of an infant. Immediately, he informed authorities of the victim, where the chief of police, Sir Richard Ford, handed him new orders: drag the canal for any other potential bodies. After 3 days of dredging the bottom, another victim was discovered. The bargemen found the body of a woman entangled in a loose bush. The bodies were placed in a workhouse in Chelsea. While being held, many individuals from nearby areas were questioned, including a woman named Margaret Bradfield. Margaret was the wife of a local landlord, Joseph Bradfield. Margaret explained she recognized the victims on the table, claiming they were the wife and daughter of one of their tenants. His name was George Foster. George Foster married Jane Humphrey at St. Clement's Dane on June 26, 1794. Together, the couple had 4 children. 1 died during infancy, 2 were sent to a workhouse in Barnet, and the 4th was a baby named Louisa. George was described as a diligent man who employers felt were very hardworking even during the harsh economic conditions of the time. He tried to take care of his family the best he could, but his position as a coachmaker did not pay enough to afford a home for all of them to live. So George opted to rent a room from the Bradfields in North Row Governor Square, while Jane and Louisa lived with her mother in Old Boswell Court. They made arrangements to spend the weekends together at George's lodgings. According to the Barfields, they saw the deceased with George on Saturday night, December 4th, and they left together at about 10 o'clock in the morning on Sunday. George returned by himself Sunday night between 8 and 9 o'clock. According to Joseph, he didn't feel the couple were on good terms. He claimed that Jane wished to live with George, but he was not keen on the idea. He stated Jane called many times a week asking for money from him. Jane's mother was also questioned about the couple, where she explained that generally her daughter and grandchild went on Saturday nights to stay with George. Jane left her mother for that reason a little before 4 o'clock on December 4th, taking Louisa with her. She never heard from her after that. She was worried about what might come of her, but then the news spread of the bodies discovered in the canal. She was able to confirm the victims were Jane and Louisa. Several other witnesses came forward, claiming to have seen George and his family in various public houses near Paddington Canal during the day Sunday. Eleanor Winter, a keeper for the Westbourne Green Tavern, recalled George and his family coming in on December 5th. They stayed for several hours eating and drinking before leaving around 1 p.m. Eleanor also viewed the bodies discovered in the canal and confirmed she was the same person with George at the tavern. Hannah Patience, the landlady of the Mitre Tavern, also saw George and his family on December 5th. They stayed a good while and she served them several drinks. They left 4:30, and as they were heading out, Hannah heard Jane exclaim, "This is the last time I shall come here," before throwing her gown over her child. Hannah believed this wasn't about her patronage at the tavern, but the relationship with George. Sarah Daniels, a 9-year-old girl, was near the canal when she met a man following a woman and a child. She stated it was around 5 o'clock. Charles Weald, a friend of George, claimed he met with him a little after 6 o'clock on the evening of Sunday. The two went together to a different public house where they hung out until after 8 p.m. The investigation took several weeks just to track down witnesses. The process of confirming that George Foster was the last person seen with the victims was a task. George was not taken into custody until after Christmas. Once in custody, George denied having murdered his family and provided his series of events for December 4th to December 5th. This was George's alibi, a direct quote from the Newgate calendar. My wife and child came to me on Saturday night about 8 o'clock in the evening and slept at my lodgings that night. The next morning about 9 or 10 o'clock, I went out with them and walked to the New Cut at Paddington. We went to the Mitre Tavern, drank and ate. Before that, we stopped at a public house near the first bridge where they ate and drank more. After which, she desired me to walk further on by the cut. So I went with her. I left her directly. I came out of the Mitre Tavern, which was about 3 o'clock, and made the best of my way to Whetstone to go to Barnet to see 2 of my children who were working at a workhouse there. I went by the by-lanes and was about an hour and a half walking from Mitre to Whetstone. When I got there, I found it so dark that I couldn't go to Barnet, but came home that night. I have not seen my wife nor child since. I have not inquired after them. I came home from Whetstone that evening between 7 and 8 o'clock. I saw no person going to Whetstone, nor did I stop anywhere at any public house or elsewhere except the Green Dragon at the Highgate, where I had a glass of rum. My wife had a black gown on and a black bonnet. The child had a straw bonnet and a white bedgown. My wife was a little in liquor. He admitted he wanted out of his marriage, but wouldn't resort to murder. Elizabeth Southall, the barkeep for the Green Dragon, was questioned about George's statement, where she recalled seeing him in the bar, but she was not sure which Sunday he was there. After being taken into custody, many of George's friends came forward to testify to his character, believing he was incapable of committing the crimes against him. They stated he was innocent, industrious, and humane, but despite his 4 character witnesses, the jury did not agree. The coroner delivered the cause of death as drowning for both victims. Both the coroner and surgeon examined the bodies and determined there was no sign of violence. Despite George's story, he was not believed by the Chief Baron or the jury. Chief Baron summarized the case to the jury, stating, "The case was almost entirely dependent upon circumstances, but in some cases that might be the best evidence of all, as it was most certainly the most difficult to fabricate." Reviewing his written statement, they noted that in one part of the story, he contradicted what several of the witnesses claimed. Plus, his story of walking to Whetstone, which was more than 9 miles away from the tavern, in an hour and a half, or walking in total almost 20 miles in a little over 3 hours, was not a credible alibi. The jury claimed, why would he be lying, if not for guilt? The judge reviewed all of the evidence, and after the jury's consultation, found George Foster guilty of murder on January 17th. He was sentenced to death by hanging, and upon death, his body would be anatomized. Dissection was added to the Murder Act of 1752. They hoped the mention of this punishment would deter criminals from breaking the law. However, under English law, only so many bodies were allowed for dissections. Typically, medical schools were at the front of the line to receive these bodies for performing experiments. The bodies were often skinned, burned, and cut into pieces. These procedures resulted in widespread fears due to the rumor of people waking up during the experiments. For George's case, the Royal College of Surgeons was selected to receive his remains. He would be publicly dissected and also electrocuted in the name of science. A man by the name of Giovanni Aldini, an Italian natural philosopher, was given the green light to further his uncle's research into galvanism. His uncle, Luigi Galvani, discovered animal electricity in 1780. For more than a decade, Luigi studied properties imbued in dead frogs. When the amphibian's legs were touched by an electrical arc, they twitched. This indicated vital fluid circulated through them, which could, in theory, be manipulated with an external metal apparatus to potentially restore vitality. This became known as galvanism, and due to his uncle's research, Giovanni's interest in the field was sparked. Upon Luigi's death, his nephew took his studies a step further by performing the same experiments on larger animals. He worked with the heads specifically, where he made their eyes roll and tongues stick out. Giovanni believed with the right specimen he could produce the same results in humans. He practiced on other criminals who were beheaded, but due to the lack of blood, he found it impossible to restore vitality in these conditions. Giovanni felt a fresh subject would produce the results he wanted. He felt he could restore life. George's sentence was carried out on January 18th. He was held at the Newgate prison in London. Just after 2 p.m., he appeared on the platform before the drop door in the Old Bailey. After a moment of prayer, the hood was placed over his head and the door was dropped from under him. Before his death, George confessed to his crime. He claimed he was unhappy and he hated his wife. On 2 other occasions, he alleged he tried to drown her, but just couldn't do it. He regretted the death of Louisa more than Jane. By English law, he had to hang for an hour. He was then cut down and carried across town to the Royal College of Surgeons. Giovanni attached probes and electrodes to his arms, legs, chest, and forehead. The machine was then powered on, and the experiment began. Several bystanders reported George's jaw quivered, and the adjoining muscles contorted with his left eye opening. His right hand raised and clenched. The movement of his body seemed like an indication that George was returning to life. The process continued for hours, where at one point he seemed to inhale. But, eventually, the battery ran out and the body stilled. Silence fell upon the room when everyone realized the experiment failed. George Foster died at the gallows, and remained so. The experiments conducted that day became the topic of discussion throughout London. Although Giovanni returned home, blaming his failure on the battery, the doctors present that day went on to continue to discuss the miracle they'd witnessed with family, friends, and acquaintances. Although reanimation was a popular topic at the time, the experiments only fueled the conversations. A medic, Anthony Carlisle, was present at the college, and for him and others, it became the conversation at most get-togethers. Particularly in Anthony's case, he attended a weekly get-together hosted by his friend William Godwin. At these events at his home, poets, writers, doctors, scientists, and philosophers all attended, where it became the perfect environment to discuss these hot topics and interests. William had a bustling house. Aside from his wife, he lived with his daughter Mary, his adopted daughter Fanny, and his wife's 2 children, Jane and Charles. During these events, the children were not supposed to be around, due to the conversations that were discussed amongst the men. Their mother often ushered them up the stairs. But children are curious, so oftentimes they hid behind sofas or waited at the top of the stairs, listening in on the stories. And of course, the reanimation experiments of George Foster made its rounds. Little did her parents know, Mary, the little girl who lives in the house, would pick up where Giovanni left off, years later in the form of fiction. Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin, better known as Mary Shelley, published Frankenstein, or The Modern Prometheus, in 1818. The story of scientist Victor Frankenstein creates a creature in an unorthodox scientific experiment. Besides being around her father's friends, Mary also married Percy Shelley, who shared the same ideas of Galvanism and the occult. At the age of 18, she started writing the story of Frankenstein. The first edition of the novel was published anonymously, but the second edition in 1821 was published with her name. Many have noted Victor Frankenstein and Giovanni share similar qualities. Both were scientists who had a passion for forbidden knowledge and a great deal of showmanship. Both tried to restore life, but in her account, the dead returned, but at a fatal cost. In recent years, a BBC documentary, Real Horror Frankenstein, brought to question the fairness of George's trial. Allegedly, a friend of Jane's claimed she was a danger to herself. She often talked about ending her and Louisa's life. The same reference suggested George gave his confession under duress. They also alleged that Mr. Pass, the official who made the reports and assisted in religious functions, was on Giovanni's payroll. They claimed he might have fast-tracked the trial to obtain the freshest corpse for him legally. They believed that George might not have been a murderer after all, and Jane might have been responsible for her and Louisa's death. Jane Foster was buried at the churchyard of St. Paul in Hammersmith on December 19th. She was 34 at the time of her death. Louisa was not buried with her mother, but interred the next day, 3 miles away at St. Luke's in Chelsea. George Foster was buried at the Newgate Prison Cemetery. Hi friends, if you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. As always, I'm interested in hearing your opinions, so leave them below and we can chat about this case. If you found this to be informative, please consider giving the video a thumbs up to let YouTube know you want more from me. And lastly, if you have not subscribed yet, you should, because we would love to have you under the ash tree. Thank you again for tuning in and listening to the real inspirations behind one of literature and Hollywood's most famous creatures. As I've said before, I'm very passionate about classic monsters. So I want to know what your favorite is. Mine, personally, is the Gill Man himself, the creature from the Black Lagoon. I appreciate you always, and I hope you have a great week ahead of you, because you deserve it. But for now, we must part ways. So stay safe out there, and I will see you in the next one. Bye, friends.